Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. I'm Mitali Mukherjee. As the Prime Minister chose to reshuffle and reshape the cabinet earlier this month, the big questions still remain. How will India wade through the pandemic and the health crisis it's been facing for the last year and a half? And what can be done to retrieve the economy from the tottering brink that it seems to be on? Unemployment remains quite high, growth is low, sentiment is low as well, and the only thing that is worryingly surging is inflation, both in terms of what people are paying for their fruits and vegetables and fuel, and on many other parameters as well. Could this or does this look like the toughest phase ever that India has faced economically? Joining me to talk about that and where the solutions still lie is West Bengal Finance Minister Dr. Amit Mitra. Thank you, Dr. Mitra, for joining in and speaking with me. Much has happened in the last few years, I think, since we have touched base. But most importantly, it's what's happened with the economy. We're sort of coming out a second wave of COVID. And there is this strange dichotomous nature to the data we're looking at. You know, some of the fast moving indicators seem to show economic recovery, but equally, there's a much larger swath that has moved below poverty. MSMEs are struggling. How does one rationalize what's happening with the economy at this point, sir?
I think the fundamental question is of two contradictions. The first is that GDP, as you know, has gone to negative 7.7% for the year. Of course, 23.5% was in the first quarter, which is the highest in the world. Now, GDP is falling. That means the economy is cooling. It's in economists call it a cooled economy, not hot, not heated. While it is cooling, there is inflation, which is like indicating the economy is heating. Cooling versus heating. This is how economists term it. Now, inflation is 12.94% of wholesale price index compared to May 2020, soaring. So the question, so on one hand, you have recession because 2 quarters were negative. On the other hand, you have inflation, which is exactly contradictory to an economy where there isn't sufficient demand, and which means it is a negative growth of negative 7.7%. On the other hand, rising inflation. This is contradictory. And what is the reason for it? The reason for it is that Government of India does not understand, in my humble view, macroeconomics. What you do in a situation like Great Depression or a meltdown, financial meltdown as in 2008, or in COVID, which is haunting the whole world, what you do, which every country is doing, is stimulate demand. That means you give money to the hands of the common people whose marginal propensity to consume is very high. That means if you give them 100 rupees, they'll spend 98 rupees. This is what every country is doing. UK has the furlough plan where they give 80% of your salary. The government. United States capitalist economy is handing over $2,500 to $3,000 a month to families so that they go and create purchasing power and they create demand. Now, what is the Government of India doing? They are doing what we call supply side stimulation. What does that mean? Give interest rate reduction, give some guarantees to the bank. Now, these have very long time lag, and why should a businessman invest when there is no demand in the marketplace? Now, so this is first contradiction. And this is where I'm worried that now we are in a stage of stagflation. And the level of stagnation is phenomenal. Index of core industries, of 8 core industries, negative 6.5%. Purchasing manufacturers index, negative 19.7%. Plant machinery investment, lowest in 20 years, which means there is absolutely no appetite for investing because there is no demand and the government just doesn't know macroeconomics, that you stimulate demand. Every country in the world is doing. Now I come to the second contradiction, which is profit of listed companies is the highest in 4 years. 2.6% of GDP. It has grown by 11%.
Yeah.
6 lakh crores are sitting in the books of companies, but they're not investing. Now, how has profit gone up? You give a tax break. This is again a supply side economics. Sounds like Ronald Reagan. You give a tax break thinking that businesses will take that tax break of 10% and take that money and invest. What are they doing? They're putting the money in their books, 6 lakh crores, which simply means that on one hand, your wrong policies resulting in providing corporates tax breaks, and they are quietly putting it in their books because they don't want to invest. Contradictory to that, and this is very shocking, is unemployment soaring. So on one hand, profits very high. On the other hand, unemployment 10.03% in 2021, according to Government of India data. 1.5 crores people in the May 2021. 1.5 crores people unemployed. That is 15 million people. Job losses. They've lost their jobs. Now, this was in 2017-18, it was only 4.62%. Now it is 10.03% unemployment. So on one hand, you have huge profits in the books sitting of corporates, 6 lakh crores at one point. On the other hand, people have no jobs. Now, this is a contradiction which is absolutely consistent with the wrong macroeconomic policies of the Government of India. Why did you give them a tax cut when you know they will not invest because there's no demand in the marketplace? United States didn't give a tax cut.
Yeah.
So I have pointed out to you two fundamental flaws because of lack of knowledge of macroeconomics or no advising on macroeconomics, completely out of line with the whole world's macroeconomic policy, whether it's US, UK, Japan, Italy, France, Germany, anybody you take. They are trying to stimulate demand. That's the Keynesian model. Here, there's ignorance or lack of understanding or lack of taking advice. You start tinkering with supply side, which is what usually is done to correct business cycles, not to get out of Great Depressions. And I have said this many times, but nobody listens. Now, I'll only add, when the Modi government came to office, the growth was 8%.
Yeah.
2015-16 GDP growth. Then came demonetization, bang. 6.8%, 6.53%, 4.04%, now negative 7%. Systematic decline with no understanding, with no empathy for those who have lost their jobs. You said at the beginning that the informal sector is completely finished. And the informal and an unorganized sector employ 93% of the people in India. They are done with. Small businesses struggling, hit by GST, completely unprepared way launched. Again, another problem, which we can come to later. So on one hand, you have unemployment, you have informal and unorganized sector collapsed, you have small and medium enterprises who are the big employers. They are in bad shape. And profits of the corporate world, 11% growth, 6 lakh crores in the books. This is an indication of complete lack of understanding of how to run an economy. Everybody understands, but not this country, unfortunately.
I want to dwell for a little bit, Dr. Mitra, on the specific point of inflation. Because it's not just what we've seen on food or fuel inflation. Core inflation has started ticking higher as well. up until now, the Reserve Bank seems to not consider that the biggest risk. But it is true that at an individual basis, citizens are really feeling the pinch of what they purchase, whether it is fuel or edible oils or food. How does that play out, just as an economic scenario when you have growth that is clamped down to, the levels that you mentioned, while you're also dealing with this raging increase in prices? And you're right. I mean, even if we were not to compare with developed countries such as in the EU or America, there is no other country in the Asian region either that is dealing with this kind of inflationary
Yes.
situation.
Yes. I think you take the case of prices. Edible oil has grown by 30% increase in price. Eggs, basic thing for common people, only form of nutrition of a protein variety, 15% increase. I mean, you are talking about the common people being hit the most. Now I come to petrol. You'd be surprised to know that then minister, now he's no more the minister of that department, Mr. Pradhan, he admitted in parliament that the central tax on petrol was raised by 83%. 83% between 2018 and 2020-21. Now, a diesel by another hefty percent, 129% increase. I also want to point out to your listeners or viewers, in 2013, before Mr. Modi came to office, the total amount of revenue collected from petrol and diesel was 52,500 crores. Do you know what it is what was it in 10 months in 2020-21? Almost 3 lakh crores. That's an increase of 460% of tax collection by the center. Now, if you look at state taxes and central taxes, you also find a huge divide. Today in petrol in Kolkata, 32.7% of the price at the pump is being collected by the center, including cess and surcharge and their own taxes. The state of West Bengal is collecting only 19%. So they're more than almost double the amount, at least near double of what the state is collecting, all the states you put together, and what the center is collecting. Can you imagine the growth in their revenue collection by 460% between the time that Mr. Modi came to office and what it is today? This is fleecing the people of their, for what? And then not taking that money and putting into demand stimulation. LPG, take simple LPG, which is what housewives use in India every day. I mean, men and women, whoever cook, they use. Common people. It was 584 rupees in 2020 May. 584 rupees. What is it now? 861 rupees. Now, the subsidy that was given to the poor through a program of the center, that has been cut off from 2020 May. So there's no subsidy. So the poor person will have to buy an LPG cylinder at 861 rupees. This is absolutely unacceptable. And nobody is there to explain. Nobody is there to bother. There's no leadership.
Because you've been someone who's also been part of the corporate community, Dr. Mitra, let me ask you this. Since, people look at the stunning rise of the stock market versus what we're discussing at a very individual level, what are the long-term effects of these kind of short-term shocks? As you know, the government is also very fond of alphabets. So we've been referring to a V-shaped recovery, a W-shaped recovery. We've been through all of that. But is there lingering damage you fear that comes from these kind of, hit and run movements on the economy?
I think it is a very interesting question in the sense that if you do not understand macroeconomics, a basic Keynesian model everybody is following, you will constantly make mistakes. For example, the package that the Union Finance Minister released just about maybe 15 days ago claimed to be 6.5 lakh crores. Look at it carefully. how much of it goes as fiscal output of cash in the hands of the people? Nothing. Very small quantum. So it's a kind of a veneer. It's a kind of veil that we are doing something. We are telling the banks you lend, but everybody knows that nobody is going to borrow and then invest. They may take the borrowing and park it. It is known. So now in this environment, when you talk of the stock market, as you know, a significant proportion of the stock market is buying and selling or transactions by international buyers and sellers. And quite a big proportion of that could be hot money. There is no estimate of that. So today they are pumping in money because they don't have somewhere else to invest in. As other economies, as developed economies pick up, they will luck out. They will just sell out. So what is interesting is this is a hot money business at the margin, not on the scale, but the real 40% buying and selling at the margin is done by them, and they have the whole world to play with. So they know that India is an emerging market, and right now they will also, let me tell you, lot of buying and selling is taking place by top firms. I don't want to name them, world's biggest firms, buying and selling and acquisition and non-acquisition going on in the marketplace, which common people don't know. This is the time to buy. So let's get in there. And therefore, what is interesting is let's not give that credence to the stock market compared to the macroeconomic data that I am presenting to you. Yeah. That's the fundamental. Unemployment is a reality. Falling of the informal sector is a reality. Small and medium enterprises falling is a reality. Corporate profit in the midst of this is a reality. So you are talking about the reality, which is what macroeconomists look at. Stock market comes and goes, it goes up, goes down. It's a various other international factors. And one thing happens in the world and it will change. Reserve Bank governor says one thing and his body language makes the stock market change. Here I'd like to mention, interest rate was brought down 5 times by the Reserve Bank. Why? To stimulate investment. Nothing happened. So the interest rate has become a non-instrument today. You can keep on bringing down interest rate. Nothing will happen because there is no confidence of the investor in India today. So they're holding on to their surpluses, waiting for Godard.
What's the state level experience, Dr. Mitra? What's also happened over the last few months is several states, including Tamil Nadu recently, have decided to take a completely different path. What's the West Bengal experience been in terms of how you want to support the state economy?
Well, first of all, it's interesting that while nationally negative 7.7% GDP growth, West Bengal's GDP growth has been in positive 1.2%. Now, how did we hold on to this positive growth when the national is falling apart? What we did is exactly what I'm explaining. Mamata Banerjee just went into a press conference and I was with her virtually on the press conference after the budget that I prepared, which was read by a senior colleague of mine. Now, I'll just give you an example. Social service expenditure in this budget, which is a part of the state development expenditure. You know, what is the social service expenditure as a part of the plan expenditure, social development expenditure that people say? 58.26%. And what does that mean in simple terms? It means money in the hands of the people. So you have Lakshmi's Bhandar for women, 500 rupees and 1,000 rupees. What will they do? They will immediately go and spend that money for whatever they desperately need. You have a Krishak Bandhu new scheme, putting money into the hands of the farmers. You have Konnashri of the girl child, putting money into their hands, free ration to people to save them in this process. So one is it's a Keynesian stimulation. 2 is agriculture and allied activities. You know what is a part of that development budget, agriculture? 26.29%. So on the whole, 85% of the development expenditure of the state, which used to be called plan expenditure before, is for demand stimulation of a Keynesian model. And therefore, while India collapses with negative 7.7%, West Bengal holds on to this. And the other interesting point is fiscal deficit. Now, national fiscal deficit is 9.3%. West Bengal's is only 3.86%. Fiscal discipline. Then you look at revenue deficit, huge in the national scene, 7.5%. We are 2.54. Again, fiscal discipline. And lastly, debt GDP ratio. Do you know what the debt GDP ratio was in 2020-21 official data? 62% of the GDP of Government of India is debt as a ratio of GDP. What is it in West Bengal? Half, 35%. So if you look at these figures, what you find is there is two totally different macroeconomic approaches. India failing with a supply side tinkering, which is like a veil, some would call it a sham, because it doesn't yield results. And West Bengal using the demand stimulation model, common people, poor people, middle class people, spending power in their hands. So that is why we have done better. You mentioned Tamil Nadu. I'm sure Tamil Nadu would be doing the same thing. So my submission is the state has remained macroeconomic theory-wise consistent, and so we have held on to a positive growth rate of 1.2%, while all of India is minus 7.7%. Central government just doesn't know what it is doing.
This is also a good segue for my next question, Dr. Mitra, because we speak after the TMC's stunning victory in West Bengal. I think a lot has been analyzed in terms of, the politics of it, or the political strategy of the win, but perhaps not enough in terms of whether economics plays a role in state election outcomes. As you mentioned on unemployment, Uttar Pradesh, for example, goes to elections, a state with raging unemployment. Are there lessons to be drawn in terms of how economic policy can and should impact state electoral outcomes? What should one do, and what kind of tangible impact do you see on the ground of that for the voter?
I think the West Bengal election is a very good lesson for political scientists and economists as well. What is interesting is, by giving money to the hands of the people, what happened? Agricultural entities, the farmers, their income has trebled 3 times. And they know that. So they came and voted for Mamata Banerjee and TMC. The women have experienced the largest process of support in terms of social infrastructure and spendable resources. So they voted in massive numbers across all lines, caste or religion or whatever. Middle class also found that this was something that their GDP has gone up hugely. Can you imagine? We came to office at 4.5 lakh crores GDP. Today it's 13.5 lakh crores. 3 times. And they feel it. So economic, and I'll give you another example, 90,000 kilometers of rural roads inside the villages. It's a record in history that you have 90,000 kilometers of rural roads. And we middle class people don't understand that a road inside the village is what they need. Then the connection with the others take place. So in every way, the lesson from West Bengal's economy, the first is that economic development initiated by Mamata Banerjee's government, huge spending, building roads, infrastructure, at the same time giving money to the people to be able to come back and demand, has paid off because different segments of society voted. And the second interesting point, I think BJP had thought that by dividing society, which is their standard policy, majoritarian policy, they brought in their biggest wigs. I mean, Prime Minister addresses 22 meetings, I'm told, in 1.5 months. Home Minister addresses 55 meetings. Many cabinet ministers sitting here, the whole of RSS, sitting in West Bengal. What they thought, perhaps, is that this society they can divide in sectarian lines. What in fact they didn't understand, best example is Qazi Nazrul Islam. He was a Muslim, great poet. He was a Muslim with namaz reading, but, and this is where syncreticity of Bengal comes, which they didn't understand, and it reflected in the votes. He also is the father and founder of Ma Kali's verses, which we call Shama Shongit. Here, this is syncretic Bengal, which they didn't understand. They thought they could break that syncretic Bengal into the divisive majoritarianism. So there is an economic factor and there's a cultural, psychological, political factor, which they did not discount. And so Mr. Amit Shah said 200 seats in West Bengal. Now, I had said at that time, by the calculations I'd done for all his state predictions, he gets only 30% correct, 70% wrong. And I think that worked in West Bengal as well. But the reason behind it, development initiated by Mamata Banerjee, where the common people rose, poverty line has, do you know that according to a London School of Economics study by Professor Ghotak, West Bengal's people below the poverty line had shrunk by 14%. That means we brought 14% people above the poverty line. Wouldn't they vote for you? People would say, no, they'll vote by religious background. No, Bengal shows that economic development and syncreticity and the resilience of the people not to allow it to be divided is what this. Therefore, I would say for UP, what would be a very good measure is for those to look at the same factors, how unity within diversity, that theme is taken forward and syncreticity is brought in. At the same time, developmental parameters are highlighted to show the failure. And you know in UP what happened with COVID. Do you know that about 2 weeks ago, we got bodies in the Ganges in the Malda region coming from UP, which were thrown into the river. And you know what has happened there. Now, people will remember these things. They're part of development. That means there was no health infrastructure. I have seen in one of your reports that a health center, 2 rooms, one had, the cow dung cakes in one room and some other things in the other room, and the health center was dysfunctional. There was an elderly man sitting within 100 meters of that health center with an oxygen, with no medicine. So these things are going to tell in the elections. They are developmentally related. Health infrastructure is a development. Mamata Banerjee has produced over 40 major super specialty hospitals at the district and subdivision level. That saved us. Because that's the investment that was needed.
What is the percentage of health spend for the West Bengal government, sir, in terms of their overall budget?
I think the overall budget spend is extremely high, and I'm not ready with the number, but it will be because of 40, all these kinds of health. I'll give you one example. COVID. We have spent 6,000 crores. You know how much center has given? 350 crores. And we have spent 6,000 crores. Part of it is on health infrastructure, beefing up the health infrastructure, taking private hospitals as well as nursing homes, converting them into COVID centers, which costs money. So what I would say is that our health budget is the second largest budget in our departments. Highest, of course, is Panchayat, which looks after all these rural roads. And number 2 is health. And number 3 is education. That's where the emphasis is.
Let me ask you a slightly longer term question, Dr. Mitra. In terms of what we're seeing economically at this point, it's clear that the government's receipts have picked up. Even so, the spend, as you mentioned as well, has actually dropped. It's the lowest that we've seen in the last 2 years. And it also seems clear that this is their intended route of working around this problem. This is their chosen path. They are not going very big on fiscal stimulus. If that were to be the case, what do you foresee over the next 6 to 9 months for an economy like India's? Because for many people, this is a very tricky point. We're likely to miss that demographic dividend. We're likely to miss the sharp pullback. What is it that you see as a state of economy down the line?
I think what I'm most worried about is stagflation. As I indicated, stagnation on one side and inflation on the other. For economists, there are no tools for stagflation, by the way. There are no standard tools because they are contradictory things. So I'm very concerned that with continuing inaction of the central government in the form of only doing supply side economics, doing something with credit, doing something with corporate profits by cutting corporate taxes and all this, and banks, so on, not giving spending money in the hands of the people directly, which everybody else in the world is doing, whether it's developed or developing or Asian countries. What is going to happen is we are already into a question of stagflation. How do you get out of a stagflation? There is no economic tool to get out of a stagflation. It's almost hit and miss. It does not come under macroeconomic theory because stagflation is an absolutely amazingly difficult animal where you have stagnation and yet you have a overheated economy suggesting inflation and you have an underheated economy with no production, no investment. So what worries me, the other factor is confidence of the investor. I'm told 7,500 Indians have become NRIs in the last 2 years. They are the most wealthiest in the country. Why have they gone away? Because they don't have the confidence. We talk about ease of doing business. Do you know in the case of GST, how many frauds took place? 71,000 crores of fraud according to Nandan Nilekani's official presentation GST counters. So on one hand, then you do demonetization, which is absolutely ridiculous. Only Gaddafi did demonetization and the Soviet Union did it twice when it was communist. So I think confidence of the investor has to come not because you put ED against them, you put CBI against them. Your massive non-performing assets, if you privately talk to industrialists today, not publicly because they're fearful, only Rahul Bajaj spoke up. And he also said that now I'm speaking up, I'll be put on a sule par chada diya. They are all clapping because they say, maro bhai. So they have fear. But what is more important is, aside from fear, demand stimulation will give them the confidence to say, okay, if I make an investment, I will make a small profit. So my concern is investment is not forthcoming, as I've given you the data earlier. Inflation is beginning to raise its ugly head. The government doesn't know what all this is about, continuing with supply side policies. Reserve Bank is unable to do anything because Reserve Bank has lowered interest rate, the only instrument they have in their hands. It has had no effect. All this put together, we are in a very dangerous situation where if stagflation becomes a permanent feature for some time, you're going to see unemployment already extremely high, raging further. And they will be the informal sector, the big employer, 93% of employment. They are not being brought back. There is no scheme for them. Why not? Small and medium enterprises are not investing because they don't have the confidence. Larger businesses are not investing, barring a few who are in the regulated sector. If you're in the regulated sector and you're in good equation with the government, then maybe you are investing because you are confident that there'll be some return. But what about the common middle business people? They have no confidence. You bring the confidence back by creating demand. They don't understand this.
Lack of confidence may also define the relationship as it stands between states and the center, Dr. Mitra. I mean, it started off with face-off around GST proceeds between states and the sharing mechanism. It moved on to, of course, something of far greater importance, which is how the vaccination process got derailed and is now slowly coming back on track in some way. Would you say that is going to be a lingering rupture between the states and the center, the breakdown in trust?
Yes. I think the only federalist institution in the country today is the GST Council. And I'm on record in showing how systematically the GST Council's democratic structure has been undermined. I've written an official letter to the Union Finance Minister saying there is an underlying sense of authoritarianism, very incipient, but more importantly, there's a majoritarian approach. So if there are 10 states belonging to the opposition in India, and including Northeast's 8 states, you have maybe 15 states or 16 states in the BJP ruled states, you have a tendency to have majoritarianism. This was not the case in GST. I had once fought on an issue with the previous chairman for 4.5 hours with 2 tea breaks. And at the end, he yielded. And he said, okay, I think there is a point to this now that we have covered the discussion. Today, there's no discussion. At the end of the meeting, I've written to the Union Finance Minister, public domain. It's not that I'm telling you something outside of what I've said publicly, that the meetings do not end with a conclusion. The conclusion we heard in the October meeting in the press conference. Now, we said zero rated tax for all products today in maybe 3 months, 4 months for COVID related. 18% tax on hand sanitizer. They maintained it. They didn't change it. You put 5% tax on masks. How much revenue will you collect? You put 5% ultimately, started with 12%. When we are fighting like hell, all right, give them some concession, some crumbs. Oxygenator. You put a tax. Testing machine for the RT-PCR. You put a 12% tax on that. Then you fight to bring it to 5%, but not zero rating. Now, how states after states are saying this, if you're going to work on consensus, that is collapse. And now the other part of this is states are not being paid their due monies. Yeah. West Bengal has huge amount dues to the center. How do we manage it? Even the devolution, which is 42% of the taxes they collect, devolution used to come on the 1st of the month. Now it's been shifted to 15th of the month. Now, when do states pay their salaries? On the 1st of the month. How am I going to bridge the 1st to the 15th? I have to borrow. Now, we've said and written saying, hello, it has always been 1st of the month. No. So what worries me is that the federalist character of India, which is so important, irrespective of political parties, was there before in GST Council as a case in point. That has broken down. Every level it is broken down. And you said about COVID, let me say, from 16th of January to 4th of May, the Modi government changed the policy on vaccines 5 times. What is this? You go to Bihar and say, I'll give you free vaccines in the Bihar campaign officially. Yeah. Then you suddenly come back and say, no, states will pay 300 rupees. Private sector will pay 600 rupees. No country in the world, including capitalist countries like USA or UK, they are 100% vaccine payment. If on 16th of January, I say this with authority, on 16th of January, if Mr. Modi had introduced free vaccination bought by the center for which he had 35,000 crores allocated, at least out of the 1 lakh people who died between 16th of January and 4th of May, at least 40% could have been vaccinated and saved. So we are talking about lives due to lack of policy understanding. Now today they have come back and said, okay, we'll give you a vaccine. If you had done that on 16th of January, we would have looking at saving 40% or 50%, or at least 40,000 people's lives. So here is another case of lack of federalism. You don't listen to the states. You say, I'll give you, and then you withdraw. Then you start, okay, you start paying. So my submission to you is, fundamental challenge in the political economy of India is the undermining of the federalist polity of India, which is lurking. And I can only pray that some sense will come back to the central government's mind that this is a irreversible process. once you bring in those institutions which undermine federalism, anybody who comes to power in the future, unless they're radically clear in their minds, this will persist. Just like stagflation, getting out of stagflation is tough. So I must say, this is key to the democracy of India.
I want to close with a final question, Dr. Mitra. You've been in the steering seat for many terms now as finance minister of the state, and reports indicate that perhaps you would like to call an end to your stint as finance minister. You didn't contest the elections this time round. Would you like to address those reports and whether or not there is going to be a change in guard in terms of who runs the finances at the state?
I think today already Anandabajar, which had published this report from which the rest emanated, have already written something different. I would urge you to read it. I presented the budget. Yeah, it is very simple. Why should I resign? I saw some news report of some national business paper saying, I am going to resign. Why should I resign? I am the sitting finance minister of West Bengal. I have just presented a budget. Yes, my health is not good, as you know. So I could not appear in the assembly in the middle of the COVID with my health condition. My colleagues were kind enough, and initially Chief Minister was kind enough to present the February budget for me with my name on the budget. Now somebody else, but why? I'm doing everything more, even more than what a finance minister does. I've written 3 letters to the Union Finance Minister. I've written to Mr. Pradhan on the question of SAIL. Now he's no more the Minister of Steel. There's a musical chair there. So therefore, now they have got no reply on that. And they've quietly disbanded that organization of their infrastructure of the sales mines. So I am doing more than what people, it's the people who matter. They expect of me. I do 40 files a day because finance is always the ultimately. So where is the question? I haven't resigned. I will not resign. There is no question of resigning. I don't know from where this comes and says I have resigned or I am about to resign. I am the finance minister of West Bengal. I'll continue to do so to the best of my ability in what Mamata Banerjee has given me as charge. I will do that. So I think yesterday's news has been contradicted by today's reports. And I don't know where these news emanate from. So therefore, I would say I'm here with you. Despite my health as finance minister, I'm not resigning. I'll continue and serve the state that Mamata Banerjee has entrusted me with.
It's great to hear that, sir. And I hope both things move smoothly for you, the health and indeed running the state government. Thank you so much. It's been such a great chat. I really appreciate your time and insight today. Thank you for speaking with me.
I will be there in the next GST meeting. I can tell the Union Finance Minister through you. So we have regard for each other, but we have differences. And I hope she will be happy to know that I will be there in the next GST meeting.
Absolutely, sir. What are we if we cannot respect each other's differences? Thank you so much again for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for speaking.
Thank you very much.